And all right. So that are all the AIs coming in. So a little bit of context about me and why we are doing this. So I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of NREF. We are a workflow automation which is specifically built for GTM, and we are going to be talking about signal-based outbound for this roundtable. Why this came about was especially because I feel lucky to be in a position where I see like more than 50 different implementations of strategies and different types of SaaS as well as services companies that are leading growth in their own spheres. And I feel that I should bring it to a larger audience about what I see in terms of trends. And towards the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, I think there was a big movement away from our target audience, as in people we want to sell to people who want to buy from us, which is exactly why we wanted to get into signal based, or actually, it's often called situation based outbound. And why I call this situation based is something that I explain during the roundtable as well. With that context, I also have Bhargav with me. Bhargav heads demand generation at MindTickle. And not a lot of us can say that they've headed marketing, taking two companies becoming public. But Bhargav has been one of them. He has headed marketing at Freshworks as well as. So before that, I think in Mobi, I'll let Bhargav introduce himself. Sorry.
Hey, hi everyone.
Nice to see
Thanks,
you,
thanks.
Bhargav.
Hey, Jared. Nice to talk to you again. Uh, thanks for the intro, Shanta, and wonderful to meet you all. And nice little cozy group. I think I kind of like this kind of round table conversations. So something about me. I'm Bhargav. I've been part of multiple startups in the last decade or so, starting with InMobi, an ad tech startup, and I've managed marketing operations, what now we call as GTM engineering, back then at Freshworks when they were scaling from 200 to $500 million, and then moved on to head demand generation for Sprinkler, and kind of helped it scale from 500 to 800 million journey now. Just wanted to challenge myself a little bit and see how well the lean teams and the smaller companies work. So I've kind of took this upon myself to see how we can help and support MindTickle to grow from 50 and above. So right here, I manage the paid and the non-paid motions of marketing along with field.
Awesome. Thank you
I'm
so much, Bhargav. Sorry, was I cutting anyone off?
Bhargav. I'm curious, and this is Jared speaking. What are the biggest challenges you're overcoming at this stage? And like, would love to understand at earlier stages, because like there's probably a mixed group here. So I'm sure it's probably good to have
One
that
thing, let's
context.
bring Jared onto the stage as well. We all know
Uh,
Jared, and yeah, it'll be nice to have.
you guys
Yeah,
are learning
sorry,
how to use
Bhargav, go
Zoom in
ahead.
new ways.
Jared is a celebrity. Everyone knows him.
Yeah, sorry, Bhargav, I cut you off in the challenges bit.
No, no, cool. Okay. I'll go on. So, thanks for the question, Jared. Right. So that's something I want to learn, like, how different the journey is for a 50 to 100 and above company and the more mature revenue streams, right? I think one bigger challenge is that how do we do with less resources? Um, you know, how do we get more output from less resources is what I think is the biggest challenge, I would say, in the sense we don't have the luxury of the budget to spend and get more leads, and also we don't have the luxury of putting more people at the problems and get it resolved, right? So how do we solve challenges through technology comes first, and staying lean also means that being very brutal on prioritization, right? And you can't pick all the battles of the day, just pick a battle that you want to for the day and go and win it, right? I think that I see that as a major challenge, or an opportunity, for smaller companies.
Wow, I find it pretty strange that Bhargav coming from a 50 million plus kind of a company saying that even you have budget challenges. I'm sure like since 2023, 2024, all companies have looked down in their budgets, but yeah. That's something. I mean, we get to hear that all the time being early stage. Any single cost, the next time you want to go anywhere to host an event is kind of questioned by our, finance heads. But yeah, that's that's something that's coming on as a trend, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. And we also have Jared, as we all know. Jared, quick intro for you.
Yeah, I'm Jared. I'm co-founder of Rev Genius, built a community of go-to-market professionals. We have like 60,000. If you're not in there yet, join. Sales pitch done. Um, Super interesting to be working with Shanto and the NREV team. And last night I was at an event at Clay's headquarters. They had like 200 people there. And we spoke about, and it wasn't necessarily about Clay, it was more around AI and GTM, which was super interesting. The trend we're seeing is efficiencies in general, right? Like people want to be able to do more with less people. I don't know how to say it any other way. Nobody wants to remove people, to be clear. And when I say do more with less people, it could be do more with the same people as well, or like empower people as much as possible, right? So that means from a sales rep perspective, all you're doing is what makes you human, meaning talking like we're talking on sales calls, doing that, like all of phone calls, like cold calling, human. But cold emailing is being done automated a lot of ways and to a level of sophistication that we haven't had before. And was listening to an anecdote about Snowflake, big company, but this is just as good of an anecdote with everybody. They use all of like GTM engineering like resources to create the perfect email based on certain signals, but they still require the rep to hit send. And the reason why, even if it's not to make the email better, it's more as much as to catch some mistakes because AI is still congratulating certain people on SEC violations accidentally. That like holy shit, like that would be insane if a Snowflake SDR reached out to a prospect and said, "Congratulations on your SEC violation," or something, or there's another email that said like, um, "Heard you lost your job" or something like that. Like not that candid, but like they lost it not for a good reason. So having that human in the loop is critical. But like what we're finding like as well is what that's the Snowflake example, but like even like a $9 million ARR company, they had 25 SDRs and 3 sales reps. That looks inefficient. um, right now they were able to reduce to 3 BDRs uh, with way better data, and there's problems in all end of the system that was taking efficiencies away. So that company had all of these HubSpot workflows. And um, I know the fractional team that like was working with them. And when the engagement started, they're like, we don't get any leads. And they looked in the HubSpot and they actually had 150 leads, but each workflow was like negating other workflows. And not to mention, leads were routed to 2 different reps. So there was like the basic stuff not there. So I think, this has been a massive wake up call because now we have a tool with leverage that could help us a little easier than like having a document with all the 200 workflows you have in HubSpot or something and figuring out what does what. They actually paused all of them and just routed it outside of HubSpot with like, a tool akin to an NREV, right? Like, and they haven't had one mishap since. And this isn't meant to be a sales pitch for anything outside the process. Like, we need to be more efficient and effective, and teams are still growing, but teams don't want to grow without the people they add knowing how to leverage AI.
Yeah, that's on point, Jared. I think as we kind of move forward, and today's scenario kind of demands us to learn from each other, which is why I think these roundtables and these communities where we discuss what we're doing and learning from each other makes a huge difference for us, right? And especially in GTM, a lot of us lie in FOMO of what can work really good for us, what can backfire. And there again, yeah, the co-learning makes a lot of difference, honestly.
Oh, and in my example, they didn't just cut 22 BDRs. They like increased in the process, they increased like the numbers across the board. So with these three BDRs, Q4 was traditionally their worst quarter ever. Not worst quarter ever, worst quarter of the year. In 2025, it was their best. And it was their best quarter for period. So that's the leverage. That's the results. That's the outcomes.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks for that, Jared. We will get a little into the roundtable. By the way, guys, just to set a little bit of agenda, we're going to be a little hands-on. What I want to achieve from this roundtable is also for those folks who want to get their hands dirty. I'll try to guide you through a way in which, by the end of the roundtable, we have certain things to take away, as in real leads and results to take away. From this roundtable, as I mentioned, this is focusing a little on signal-based outbound, so which is where we kind of look at different types of personalized and very specific signals which cater to our own businesses only, but help us get in front of our in-market prospects before our competitors can. So we are not looking at funding signals. We're not looking at like any kind of like generic hiring signals, right? And what I mean by that is I have this just little presentation to kind of go through, which kind of guides me through the different points that I had to kind of mention. And then I'll mostly hand it over to Bhargav and Jared to look at some of the actual implementations of what this is. Right. So just getting into the slideshow, this is just a few pointers to kind of go at. Quick raise of hands, guys. How many of us hate seeing really poorly written cold outbound emails? Quick raise of hands. By poorly written, I just mean I'll actually guide you through some of the ones that I received, which is just yesterday. So yeah, so Hey Shanta came across Nurture, which is looking at companies that workflow automation. I said, noticed you guys recently received funding. Now this is really poor because we received funding like 1 year back or more than that. And if you're not at time in front of your prospects, that really doesn't sound empathetic, right? There are a few more, and I'm not going to kind of go through all of them, but look at some of these. Like, notice NREV is working with a variety of clients, curious how you're currently handling consistent lead flow. This is so generic that anyone could have written this without absolute no research about me or my company, right? So these look a little cringe to me right now because there's so much in volume and there's nothing specific to me. So the way we've seen really people kind of positioning things well is to kind of get attention by empathizing to the situation of a person. Now, I'll stress a little bit on the person because the person comprises of both the personal characteristics as well as the organization that they're fitting into, but also kind of being empathetic at the right time to their situation. And this is very simple, but often we kind of go about mistaking this. And one thing I have personally learned out of all the different implementations of signal-based outbound, as we call it, and I'll actually get into some of the signals, but one signal is not necessarily enough for us to reach out. I love the way in which MindTickle Bhargav defined this as well, which is kind of understanding the situation where a prospect typically becomes or is in a position to look out for a tool like your or tool or service like your the one that you're offering. And that typically is a resultant of one or more signals. And one again interesting analysis that we've seen a lot of companies going not just gaga about this, but really getting results out of this is to actually analyze your sales calls or your closed won opportunities and kind of set aside your closed lost opportunities into understanding what is the pattern of where a prospect is in their careers or in their position in the organization that they're actually looking out for a tool like yours, right? And this is a simple analysis, and AI today kind of gives us the power to do this very well. But once we understand the situation, then we have like the all the right to kind of automate this entire flow for ourselves. And just to set the context, one last thing I just want to take without getting into the actual signals is making the signals actionable is what makes it worth it. That's where the outcomes come. We don't want the signals lying in a table somewhere that we've forgotten about, or like our teams don't have access to. It's about how we implement those triggers to. I mean, I've just written down some of the basic parts here, like for example, finding the right personas who matter for these signals, crafting the message that empathizes, but also like a sequence. Necessarily, we don't have one message responses going too well, but a further research on the person, and then routing to the right VDR or the AE to kind of go about doing this. I mean, kind of closing the loop there, right? So it's, I mean, before we even get into signals, one of the very important parts are, knowing how to close the loop or making it actionable, right? So with that, I mean, I wanted to kind of lead with the story of, how MindTickle and Bhargav kind of implemented the signals. I remember it's been about 2 months working with MindTickle now. They've done some brilliant work on this. There are some examples that Bhargav and I have to showcase. Uh, so I'll let Bhargav start off with the story of how MindTickle kind of came about. Trying out signals, trying out very specific signals that matter only to MindTickle and probably not to most other sales enablement tools. Uh, yeah, go ahead, Bhargav.
Yeah, I mean, before I get started, I just want to quickly ask people out here, like, how many of you are already GTM engineers, working on similar tools? Maybe just GTM engineers. Show of hands, maybe. Wow.
I see
Okay.
Jonathan and Ketan.
Yeah.
Other
Awesome. Okay. The reason why I ask is like, this is I mean, GTM engineers are the hot cake in this industry right now, right? So before even I begin being a demand gen person, I just want to give credits to GTM engineers and my team who have kind of supported in this journey of orchestrating this whole thing. I'm just representing what the work they've done in the last few months or so, right? So one of the reasons why, most teams would want to get started with GTM engineering is just to understand um, even before we get there, right? So why we need GTM engineering as such? Like marketing operation itself was good place for most of us, right? Why the evolution from marketing operations to GTM engineering, right? Because there are so many ideas that used to be there with the ops person, but I think the ability to execute quickly, test, iterate was really poor. And I think with the advent of the GTM engineering and flexibility to try a lot of new ideas and quickly, test, fail, and iterate, it's become a phenomenon, or it just feels like they've gotten more power to do more things and more effectively, right? Now, starting from there, and MindTickle being still a scale up, so we always look for opportunities where we can get additional revenues, and often because of limited budgets, mostly is the case with even bigger companies these days. We often try and figure out, like, which are the accounts ideally as a company we should be going after, right? And there is a thumb rule that if you have 100% TAM or target account list to go after, only 5% are actively, looking out for your solution in the market. Rest are just, idle, just looking out, learning and educating themselves. Now, how do we identify this 5% becomes very important to ensure the budgets are very well utilized and pipeline targets are being met and the revenue is taken home, right, by the sales team. So what started as an idea, which is, hey, can we know which are the accounts that are actively in the market, looking out for some solution that is similar to MindTickle, right? Led us to understand or get deeper into social listening. So what we did with NREV is that we started understanding social conversations. So we can probably put this in three parts, like three different projects, right? One, um, let's say, are there any um, AEs or CSMs from our competition who are actively engaging with the prospects. Now, how do we understand? who are these people that are being reached out to by a competition? That's the strongest signal, one of the signals you could possibly go after, right? The other thing is that, okay, I mean, we've had a really great customers, and we have had champions in those customers who have really fought for us, in the account to get us there. Now, when they change jobs, can we kind of identify them, which companies they have gone to, and kind of identify opportunities in the newer companies, and really, quickly be able to sell to the new accounts as well, right? That's the second project. The third project is that broadly, how can we understand across the internet, what kind of conversations do people have in our respective category? Our category is like revenue enablement. Essentially, we sell to RevOps personas, the sales leaders, and the GTM folks, right? So, how do we understand who are these people who are talking about this category? Like, can these insights be given to our content team for creating fresh content, or even to understand the respective personas, right? And fetch these contact information and try and do outbound to them is what we broadly looked at. Let me share my screen and maybe try and get a little detailed, into that aspect. I hope all of you can see my screen.
Yeah, Bhagav. Let's see.
Great. See, I mean, one thing's where I start. It's just the flow chart of what I just discussed right now. We started with identifying the competition tracking, and then you have public web signals, which is from the uh, news items or earnings call, where people actively talk about what their business wants to become in the next quarter or year. So these becomes very interesting signals for us to act on if it's relevant, for the category we operate in. And then the third piece is the champion movement tracking. Like once they move to the new account, how many of them have moved? So this is the real results, guys. Like I mean, when we did this as a pilot in the first 3 weeks, this is the kind of results we've been able to achieve, right? I just couldn't put the actual pipeline number here, but it was a double-digit number, which effectively accumulated over a period of 3 months' time. So the best part here is that now what would have typically taken a lot of time and effort and the budget. For example, if you calculate, when we ended up calculating what is the CPL of the leads overall we were able to generate, it's less than $5. It's $2 to $3, but typically it goes up to like $5, less than five. Uh, the most important aspect is that as part of this, if you take the first competitor tracking initiative over here, we were able to understand how many accounts that are part of our own sales force, we've been able to identify that are active in the market. Like we don't even have to go out. And how many of those contacts were already available for us to, reactivate the conversation. Goes out to also say like how many new accounts we could potentially add. Now, this is not your this is not your static target account list, which you probably define at the beginning of the year or a quarter, and then you go all out only based on like say signals like revenue range or technographic information, right? These are static way of reaching out without even knowing whether they are active in the market. Now these dynamic signals allows you to understand which persona, which account is active and go after them. I'll probably take a pause here and just ask if there are any questions so far.
Guys, feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly or drop it in the comments, whichever works.
Great. Cool. If there are no questions, we'll move on. So this is just the overall schema of the project and how we went about it. In fact, I would say there are multiple stages to it. Right, at first stage, you just identify uh, to try and understand how many number of accounts and contacts are you able to even add, and then you kind of go on to then integrate with your systems and understand like if can you support this activity at scale and transfer these leads and account information to your BDRs and AEs, right? And then at the third stage, you also try and activate the follow-up emails, which Sayanta was mentioning in the beginning of the conversation. That then how do we contextualize based on these signals? We write emails and automate those outreach motion so that the conversation can happen at a much faster pace, and the sellers get to save a lot of time. So this is one example, that I would like to just share with you all. Like when you integrate with Salesforce, what kind of information you get, right? So you can see, Gong is being engaged by this particular contact, and we also have access to who are those people from the competition are actually engaging with this contact and on what post they are engaging with, right? And you also get to understand what kind of insights are these accounts exhibiting in the course of time, right? So you get to choose your period within which you want to understand what are the events the account is participating based on the social signals and the information publicly available, about the account where they actively talk about their new initiatives and projects. So all these information becomes a trigger for BDR to prioritize and also contextualize the outreach emails. Maybe I'll just take a pause. I'll let you all take a closer look at this screenshot.
Bhargav, can we zoom in a little bit? I think some of these are very interesting. So we are talking about sales reps of Gong interacting with the target personas like RevOps leaders in a particular prospect, and that too just Olivia, which is one contact, right? And in fact, some of these also kind of go hand in hand with the event activities and signals, which is the regular web signals, which is like basically looking at sales enablement initiatives in 2025. And this person endorsed Gong as a standout enablement platform, praising the product, etc. So we know that this is like not just an account level, but also at a person level, that this person is like a typical champion of Gong,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And at this point, I'll quickly, we have, I mean, while you could be like enthralled by what it kind of gives to MindTickle, I wanted this to also be a session where you could try this out for yourself. Um, Bhargav, if you don't mind, I'll just share the screen and let the audience know on how they can try it out for themselves.
Yeah,
It's
just
sorry,
just
yeah,
just one
go ahead.
last point also I would like to add, Sayanta, right? So now you just saw for one account how many AEs were being engaged, right? Now imagine amplifying or augmenting that information to understand like which are the other competitors are also engaging with the same contact. Then it becomes even more stronger when you know like there are the particular account or a contact is being surrounded by the competition. So yeah, this becomes a lot more powerful strategy in that case.
Sorry, Bhargav, to kind of cut you off there. Yeah,
I was gonna say no.
anyone?
I think like you got on the point a little bit. I feel like something that's I guess undersold about GTM engineering and kind of these new AI capabilities is having the competitor intelligence as well. I think that's almost just as important as having like these key signals, not only just for outbound perspective, but also for a sales enablement perspective as well. Because like you said, if you know exactly who there might be in a sales cycle with, you can position themselves against that product directly, then that's a lot more powerful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And there's so many ways, Jonathan, of looking at competitors. You could look at not just your competitors' sales reps interactions, but you could also look at who in your ICP is interacting with maybe your competitors' founders or their profile posts. You could look at who's talking crap about them on a Reddit, LinkedIn, Twitter. There's so many ways of looking at it, right? And all of these accumulate as different point signals and then ultimately can give rise to a situation where you kind of target them after that, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, for the audience, I quickly wanted to touch upon this. By the way, we had a number of cybersecurity people joining in this call. I'm not sure if anyone from Opal is here, but I thought that let me just try the first one out of all the cybersecurity people who are joining in. Quick note on, is Opal, anyone from Opal here? Opal.dev?
Yeah, right here. Me
Oh,
and Blake.
perfect, Derek. So just after I show people how they can run this for themselves, Derek, I'll get to you and try to understand if some of these are very basic signals, which without any iteration, just given to AI can find out, and then we kind of iterate over it with maybe a few weeks of time, and then get to like really particular signals like what we showed in MindTickle, right? Um,
Hmm.
so awesome. By the way, guys, you can try this out for yourself if you just get into app.nrev.ai/plays, and I'll put this link right here in the chat. Let me click. There you go. And I'll also try out the one we are trying out for Derek, for example, which is the weekly lead finder. You can also in the second page of plays find the competition tracker, which is the one that Bhargav also focused on, where you try figure out what kind of activities your competitors' sales reps are doing on LinkedIn, right? But we'll focus on this one because I just have certain results ready, and I'm really excited to show Derek as well as all of y'all to kind of look at what kind of web signals we can find apart from the competitor signals, right? But quickly to show you, if you just go into any of these, you can click on Use Play, and none of these will lead you to a workflow or a complicated system that we've already built out in the backend. Since that's already done by us, we want you to have a very simple interface where you chat with an AI. Just provide the details. For example, here you just need to provide the personas that are relevant for you within any ICP. Define your ICP, and then just click on start. It'll ask you the relevant questions, maybe one or two, and it'll get to running it all for you in the backend, right? But just for the case of Opal, we had kind of run it previously. I'm not sure, Derek, whether we have the right personas and the ICPs defined, but this is what we found out of an LLM doing research about Opal. And it kind of got into certain different positioning and structures of how you target different ICPs. But here are certain signals, right? I quickly wanted to run this by. So when we look at cybersecurity, right, we often find a lot of different public disclosures that could lead to, like for example, there's one type of signal which is called identity risk exposure, right? And I'll let Derek comment on this, but this is public disclosure of a data breach, vulnerability, or security incident related to compromised credentials, etc. Right? Derek, this is something that you generally track, or is this something which could identify people who are in market for you?
Um, Not all of it, but that obviously this might not be an exhaustive list, but some of them, yes.
Oh, yeah, like I mentioned, so there would be iterations, of course. This would capture like a wide variety of things. But like that's 70 odd signals that are being tracked here, right? But I mean, once we kind of iterate through this, then we don't change the kind of signals we're looking for. But then we kind of iterate on the prospects that we find out of it. For example, now let me get into the prospects bit. So for example, we're looking at Kaiwan in Korea, right? And the detailed signal bit about that is Taiwan disclosed ransomware attack via exposed external servers, crippling core subsidiaries. I don't want to get into a lot of detail here, but what I wanted to kind of get into was how specific you can make these signals for your business, right? If we kind of go through our sales motions and figure out what kind of, like I was mentioning, like what kind of situation a company or a persona would be in when they're actually evaluating a tool or a service like yours, that's a good way to identify what information you would be looking out on the internet for to identify these people who are going through these situations. Right. And this is just 1 week's data where you kind of get all these different, there are, I think, 70 odd leads that were found going through this. And this is just ICP qualified based on the rough estimates of ICP we had for Opal. And as you notice, like these are all in the last month itself. And the way we kind of instrument this is kind of have signals coming up every week, and then they kind of accumulate to give a score to an overall account where you can have a threshold, and then you approve it. And then there's an entire research about the persona, and then the email drafts are created, sent through LinkedIn automatically, or like your emails automatically, or it could be sent to your drafts just for a human in the loop look out for how the email has been drafted, etc. Right? So that's a little bit of it. Like I mentioned, you can just get into this play and try it out for yourself. It takes a little bit of time, I think about 20-25 minutes to run the entire thing. It's doing a lot of research. But it's completely open to you. You just need to kind of put in your ICP and I think a brief description of what your business does for both the weekly signal finder as well as the competition tracker. Would like encourage you to kind of have a look at this, look at the signals you're getting. So yeah, one last thing before I get to Bhargav again on how they've made it actionable was the part around if you want any help in kind of running this, to just experiment and see whether your A's or BDRs would want to run with any of these signals. There's this weird guy in the audience. It's called the QR code. Just feel free to scan the QR code here if you notice my screen. If you scan the QR code, you can just block a 30-minute time. We just have 3 slots in the upcoming week where we can guide you through the implementation of this signal or like the competitive signals or any other kind of signal that you're looking at. And that's of course, like a session where we interact and kind of get through this entire thing for you to kind of run that experiment by your BDRs or A's. Right. And that's pretty much it from my side. I'll kind of stop talking at this point. I think Bhargav has a lot to add on the implementation or the actionable bit of signals. Bhargav, over to you, how you've kind of experimented and iterated on, and I would also like you to add the flavor of, let's say, if you were in different situations, how you would kind of action on these signals, or how you would want to kind of set up your notifications or systems to action on these signals.
Cool. Thank you again, Shanto. But maybe I'll just pause because there has been a lot told already. So, would love if there are any questions as well. I mean, please don't, think it could be a dumb question. Please don't mind at all. I think any question is a good question, and we all can learn from something. I'll maybe give a few seconds before we move on to uh, the slides. Cool.
Or if people are trying this out, Bhargav, we could probably also have the questions towards the end.
Perfect.
However, if it is, guys, let us know when you would want to kind of interject and have a few questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. So, yeah. So the journey is very important, right? And one thing about this journey is that, it looks very complex, I'll be honest, and it's sometimes it's overwhelming too, and that's the reason why I just keep taking a pause and checking if there are any questions because at least at the earlier stage, it might feel like there are too many moving parts, and I think that's where someone like Endrev's team become very handy, to have that head start. But once you have that head start, I think there is no stopping, no one stopping you. You just kind of enjoy playing around with this tool. So where we started, right? So like like a typical demand gen function, because you want to identify the list of accounts you want to go after. Like we wanted to get started with a tech stack, right? And essentially going to understand which are the different tools they're using. Are there any complementing tools they already have that could probably allow us to have an head start, right? And what are the competitors that are being actively used by the current set of accounts we've been able to identify, right? That's where we started. And then you kind of move on to then identify what are the other situation, like to Shanto's point, there are not just technology, which is a signal, but situations like spike in hiring, for a specific role, or the accounts actively participating in some events, because again these are signals which you can pick from the social posts from these accounts, right? So that helps you understand where you have an opportunity to meet some of these people from these accounts in person as well, right? And are there any initiatives that are being rolled out by some of these companies? So combining the window of tech stack, business strategy together, that gives you one level of insights to kind of go after an account, right? Now once you know which accounts to prioritize based on the tech stack and strategy, the other next stage is to whom do we contact, and who better than the us to kind of figure out the personas within these accounts that we should be reaching out to. Once you know that, tools like Ndrev allows you to filter out the contacts, right, the relevant contacts from these accounts, and it allows you to then sync these contacts into tool like Salesforce, Outreach, the tool of your choice essentially, right? So to activate the conversation. Now I'll just probably skip the third part and go to the fourth one, just to say, like, Now, what do we talk to? Once you identify the accounts, the people to reach out to, uh, one thing I would also just pause and say that, when you go after a lot of signals, sometimes it becomes also becomes a noise. Now, so filtering out this noise becomes very essential, right? So there could be a lot of information, too many people, but what is the core interest that aligns with what you have to offer to these accounts? Now, getting here, filtering these accounts and the contacts becomes a lot more important stage. So for us, at MindTickle, AI-powered role plays are very important. Like people who are trying to scale their coaching or scale their training initiatives become a key important signal. So once we know them, we kind of have them as a P0 accounts and contacts to go after. The second level being sales readiness. So in our parlance, someone BDR, for example, having a quick ramp time and to be able to go and sell within a period of time, or someone being able to learn the new product that got launched in the company and being able to sell the new product are all the definition of readiness, right? So picking up signals for each of these and then building talking points for our sales team. So sometimes what I've what I've realized in this journey is that there is no stopping, right? People keep getting greedy. Like I want more out of AI, and I want to understand how much more AI can augment with the manual task, which would otherwise take a lot of hours. Imagine doing all this research manually and being able to compile the talking points and also the emails, right? So we then move on to creating talking points for BDRs along with the sales emails, so that they can have relevant conversations with each of the persona. Now, this email is not customized or personalized to an account, but hyper personalized to the each persona that are part of this accounts, because the needs of, if you're a multi-product company like us, it becomes very important to talk to the persona and not just to the account signals, right? So the tool also allows you to hyper personalize the communication to each persona that you're reaching out to. Again, I'll take a pause and wait for any questions.
This is an interesting part, guys. Like, quick question to everyone, as in, like, so we have multiple channels of outreach and multiple ways to close the loop as well. Anyone who's done this, any kind of results we've gotten out of, this, whether it's signals or whether it's kind of some kind of an in-moment action that we've kind of done with our prospects that would be like really helpful to kind of understand from each other's learnings. Well, that's all right. I think we've gone through a lot, but yeah, I mean, if there are anything you want to ask to Bhargav, or if you've run the workflows and gotten any results that you're looking to kind of run through with the rest of the audience here, happy to kind of go through that as well. Else we're kind of up on time, so yep. Anyone who's been able to get to the results, I think it takes a little bit of time, but um, yeah, would love to understand if anyone's facing any troubles in that. These are just experiments that we keep trying in terms of where we can find our sweet spot in our GTM. So if someone's trying it, then happy to learn what they've kind of come across.
Um, I have a question, Sandra. Thanks for hosting the roundtable. Just very curious on how you're identifying signals based on like each specific company or industry. Something that I'm running into as a GTME is we're a little bit nascent in the industry, and so there's a lot of education that's needed. And I think earlier on you were talking about like 5% of TAM and like and how to go after that. But how would you maybe think about setting up signals for the rest and remainder of them?
So there, Ketan, I think the signals remain common. That's a learning that you get out of your sales cycles, understanding where your prospects come to a stage where they are starting to evaluate a tool like yours, um, which could be like a stage in terms of the initiatives that that company is taking, or it could be basically the team that they're building, or it could be the tool stack that they're building. It could be based on multiple number of things, right? Um, And it could be very specific to your industry as well. For example, we knew that since we're working with a number of cybersecurity clients, it could be based on the compromises of data that is happening in multiple areas, finding the lookalikes of those people and kind of going behind them. But I doubt even whether it matters in terms. I mean, if we know the signals and we identify them in our ICP customers, so we're not going account first, we're going signal first. That means if we are looking for anyone who is in a situation to, let's say, AI transform their entire business, then we are looking out for anyone who's talking on social media or they're talking on any community on a forum around that AI transformation or are asking for vendors or agencies for help in terms of that AI transformation, right? And then when we find those accounts which are talking about these kind of or having these conversations, then we do an ICP filtering and then get to who matters to you, right? So it's signal first and then who matters to you. That does that make sense, Ketan?
Yes. Yes, I think it's interesting because we also have just like contact-based lists in our TAM. And so I'm
Hmm.
curious because we're doing signaling based on contacts and any relevant information that they're, for example, one thing is just like if they post anything on LinkedIn about attending a conference and like want to meet with other people, that's something that we're flagging. But I wanted to go beyond that and like what other signals exist out and that might be industry agnostic, right? That can help us flag for like our reps just in the Slack channel, like, hey, this person did X thing, similar to what you showcased earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the drift that we are seeing in the market as well, Ketan, where we move out of the targets that we have to who are actually in market to like show those signals out there, right? So if someone's actually talking about it, why don't we find out everyone who's talking about attending that particular conference or excited about meeting all other people there, and then kind of filter based on our ICPs. So it kind of gives us that dynamic way of approaching different companies at and approaching them at the right time so that it catches their attention.
Yeah, 100%. I think we're also in a stage where we're slowly coming up to what GTM means and like redefining that. Right now, our approach is definitely very like old school per se of like here's your target list, here's your prospect list, and let's go out and get them.
Maybe
Yeah,
I would just
it's
like to
something.
add one more point there, Ketan, right? I'm not sure if you're doing it already, right? So it's one thing to, sometimes we just tend to complicate things by going out to the social signals and all that stuff, right? Sometimes as simple as listening to your own website, like, which are the accounts that are coming to your website already and trying to kind of extrapolate the contacts and then doing outbound reach also sometimes becomes more powerful because they're not just exhibiting external signals but also have some signals, first party signals on your website itself, right? So that kind of augments and have helps having faster conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we are doing is monitoring, like we have an inbound form, which actually like comes in really handy after some PR news that we send out. And we see people interacting. And right now the reps are kind of identifying, like this is someone I spoke to a long time ago. So the company's like early stage, we're continuing to grow. And as that happens, I think we'll get more formalized with what that like web intent and signal looks like. And we're also rebranding like our website and stuff like that. So it's definitely on the roadmap. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and one thing I'll add there, Keaton, also is that there's something called a second party signal, which is like a proxy for your first party signal, which is like, for example, checking who's interacting with your competitors' posts, who's interacting with your own company's posts, or interacting or talking about a topic that you would be interested in, right? Who's tagging your competitors? All those things I feel can be helpful in kind of collecting second party signals, which are like basically proxies of your first party signal. That is, if they knew about your company, they would have come to your website. But right now, they're searching for things that is a proxy for what your product or services offers.
Yeah, good point.
I think you made a good point about like going from contact lists and finding signals from those lists. I was just in a situation where we have someone going to a conference, and I kind of want to prepare them to be, I guess, more prepared than everyone else who was there, and then so they would find out the best opportunities. And I think for me, the way I thought about it was, what kind of proprietary database can I get using like a genetic kind of capabilities of Clay because I'm thinking in my head, if we can get any signal that someone might not have, like if it's not funny, if it's not this, like something that people aren't thinking about, that can be relevant to that person, then you kind of have um, I guess, upper hand of someone else who might just be looking for the funding signals and then do the exact same thing that you're doing, just maybe in a less effective way. So I think thinking maybe about like what they don't have or what wouldn't be so easy to get might be somewhat of an answer. But like you said, it's definitely industry agnostic as well.
Exactly, Jonathan. I think it is extremely important to be one step ahead of your competitors and think about things that someone else wouldn't be thinking of to approach the prospect. That's a brilliant point, I feel. So Manisha asked, this is interesting. How do you identify these proxy second party signals so you can feed them to your CRM and action them? Uh, No problem, Manisha. I'll probably follow up with an email to share again a pre-built playbook, which can you can just try out, put in the names of your competitors, say, and you get those signals. I'll follow up on this since we're up on time. I won't take more on this roundtable, but I'll follow up with you on this, Manisha. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining. This was a brilliant conversation. Thank you for all your inputs. Thank you, Bhargav, Jared, for being a part of the panel and facilitating the conversation. And hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's a
everyone, and thanks
pleasure
for the
being here.
time.
Thank you. Bye bye,
And
guys.
everyone in Brooklyn, hit me up on LinkedIn. Let's get together.
Yes, sir.
Bye, everybody.